Several people have asked some questions about how to do the access portion of the project if they don't have access. Now, I've already done the video about access. However, if you're using a Mac, you don't have access. Or if you're very, very confused about access, even after doing all the assignments, and you have access, perhaps you decided you don't want to do it. It doesn't matter which way you do it. You can send in the substitute file for access. And what I want to show you is how to go about doing that file. If you're looking at the project instructions, as we are here, if you scroll down past the choosing a topic and all that, you've now chosen your topic, hopefully, and you get down to the access portion, and it says right here you can complete this MS Word document or use MS Access to create the database. If you click right here, it will automatically download the Word file that you need to do this project. So if I click here, it's going to download a Word document, and I can double click on it. It will open that document in Microsoft Word. Put it over here. And you have to enable the editing, and you read through the document, and it essentially has the instructions for the Access database if you're using Access. In addition, this is a Word document, however, and you can fill it in the table that is provided here as if it were an actual Access database. I suggest you go back and watch the Access video that I provided in a previous email and see how I went about creating the database. The database I did was based on my proposed topic, which I decided to do a vacation destination. And what I used Access for, I was planning to have a vacation where a group of friends of mine and I would all join together at this location. So in my particular database, again, if you've watched the video, you'll recognize this. You can fill in the name of the table. Remember, the table is where all of your data is going to be stored. Mine was called Friends. And what you do with the table is you choose what you're going to store, what kinds of data you're going to store. Those are the field names. Things like last name, and all of my data types were short text. Remember, when you're in this table, to go from one line to the next, you need to hit the Tab key, not the Enter key, as I just did. In a database, most of the time, the address is broken up into the different components of the address. That would be the street address, and remember, all of these are going to be short text. The street address, the city, the state, the zip code, and if you keep tabbing, on mine I had a couple of extra fields than you actually are required to have. And the primary key, if you recall, uh, there was a primary key called the ID field that Access created for us. And the ID field is an auto number field. That's the data type. All the others are short text. Now, you can choose to have different kinds of data types if you're really in Access. However, you'd have to have different kinds of data because there are if you have dates involved. If you're doing inventory, it might be the number of items that are in your inventory. So data types, if they're numeric, can then be used later on for doing calculations. But the reason that Access provided us with the ID field was so that you can identify individual records, and you have to have at least one field that is entirely unique for each record. And so when Access creates this ID field, it's just a numbering system. It just numbers them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which guarantees that each entry you make, as far as the data itself, is going to be unique. So my ID field, I'm going to leave it as the ID field. Now, if you have unique data, perhaps you have, again, if someone was doing a small store or something, a database for a small store, it might be the item number, stock number, something like that. But in our case, I'm going to leave it as the ID field because I don't have anything in here that will be absolutely totally unique, or that will be guaranteed to be totally unique. So this is what I have for fields. Again, remember, fields are the kind of data I'm going to store about each thing. Each thing is going to be a person. So I'm going to scroll down, and it explains what you're going to do, and it actually even shows you that an example from Access. And you're in this particular table, the ID field, or the field names go in the gray box. And because the table would have to be modified, so I can't put everything in here. I would need in the Word document because it would change the shape of the table. Then you actually have to put in the data that you're in this, because you're not doing it in Access. You're going to put just like you were using a table, you're going to put in the records. The records are the information about each of the individual people. And I'm not going to fill in the rest of the data, just it would take too much time. You don't need to sit here and watch me type. Once you have all your data stored in the table, then you can start to do the things that people use Access for. Now, you're not actually going to do that because you're not using Access, but you need to understand the concepts involved in using Access. So they show you a picture of how to create a query. A query is, just as the name implies, a query is a question you're going to ask about the database. In this particular instance, it asks you to figure out what you would do if you had at least 5 fields, or and in my case I had 7. And how would you do a query? What would you limit the query to? So in this case, we're going to have just 3 fields. I'm not going to use the ID field. Oops, field name here, not the person. If you ran a query and asked it to only show you 3 fields, what would it show you? So the field name would be last name, first name, and city. And they're all going to come from whatever you call your table, which in my case was friends. Each query also gets a name. A lot of them get default names, and what it'll do is it will take the table name, which is friends, and call it friends and query. But when you actually do it in Access, you can name the query whatever you want. You can call it 3-field query or whatever makes sense to you. As you get more familiar with using Access, if you ever do, you'll get to understand that you're trying to describe these things, because you may end up having 20 to 30 or 40 queries as you ask more information from the database. You will also have more tables. The next query in my Access database, if you watched that, was called friends query sorted. And in this one, in the sorting query, it asked for 4 fields to be shown, so I'm going to also include the state. And they're not fiends, they're friends. And then in this line, you decide which field you want to sort on. Since it makes sense in what I used in the Access demonstration, was I used the last name field to sort, and I'm going to sort it ascending, which means alphabetical. If your field that you were sorting was numeric, ascending would be numeric from smaller to getting larger. Descending is the other option, and that's getting smaller, or in alphabetical order, it would be reverse alphabetical. Query 3 is friend's query, and this is the one we are going to use some kind of criteria to limit the number of things that are being shown from your database. So I've got my data, my information in here, what field I have, what the table is, which is always the same. I only have a single table. And then the criteria is what I'm going to limit this to. In the example that I gave you in the access video, I decided to call it, use the city. And I'm going to type in Tampa. And what that would display would be all the ones, all the records I have that are in the, that have Tampa as the city, which in the case I had as an example, if you watch the video, I only put two things in. One was Brandon and one was Tampa, and so it would show me the ones that are from Tampa. The last two things, what steps would you take to create a report? What information would you include in this report? And then what steps would you take to create a form? And what information would you include in this form? You can go back and watch the access video and you'll see how to do that. Or you can call upon your own information if you recall from the class when you did those particular areas, when you did the access information and database information. Reports, remember, are what the output would be if you wanted a paper copy of something. A form would be, if you're using a form to enter data, what would that form look like? So you're going to have to get that information from other sources. I'm not going to answer the questions for you. So if you have any further questions about this, remember, you're just going to save this, and you're going to save this Word file as your last name and the final project, and you're going to need to make sure that you call this final project access, because if you already did your Word document and you named it correctly, you would be naming this, you named your first Word document as your last name final project. If you named that again, it would erase that if you put it in the same location. So I'm going to be looking for, in this particular case, for those of you doing the substitute assignment for access, I'm going to be looking for 2 Word documents from you, or else there should be an access database. And that will still, again, have the same file name, last name, final project. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email. You have until next Sunday to do this. Good luck.